afternoon, once again, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Gregorian, President and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. Welcome to today's meeting. It's a big birthday year for the Detroit Economic Club, 90 years of incredible speakers and networking, and that tradition will continue today. I especially do want to welcome our DEC members. If you're not a DEC member yet, just give me 10 seconds to convince you. Your next prospect, client, job, best friend is right in this room. If you want to build your network and learn from thought leaders on stage, like today, we invite you to join the club. You can do so at econclub.org. In fact, if you want to do so today, we'll sweeten the deal. We'll give you a free event ticket you can use through June. If you're interested, just stop at our registration table on the way out. As we get started, I would ask you to just take a moment and silence your cell phones, please, so we don't disturb the program. And if you've been with us before, you know we always get started with a pledge and a prayer. So please stand and join me as we honor our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by my very good friend, Mark Ostash. Mark is a longtime DEC member and a compassionate person who loves and prays for the companies he works with. Mark, come on up.
Thank you, Steve. Great to see you. Good afternoon. I had the privilege this past November of leading my first convocation here at the Detroit Economic Club, and I ended my remarks with prayers that the Lions win a Super Bowl. Although my prayers have fallen short, I've realized in the last few months that anything is possible, and it's our job to come to God for the requests that we have in our hearts. I also hold in my book a hand called Every Moment Holy, and I want to just share a few moments that we could consider praying for before we pray together today. You could pray together before sharing a meal with a friend, before moving into a new home, before welcoming a new pet, before the morning of a medical procedure, before a home repair. For those facing slow memory loss, for those missing somebody, you can even pray for serving others, for husbands and wives at the start of their day, for husbands and wives at the end of their day, before eating a meal alone, before the ritual of a morning coffee, and even for the loss of electricity. Jerry, I'm going to bookmark that one for you for the next outage. But today I'd like to select a prayer before a purposeful gathering. So if we could bow our heads, and I'd ask that if you feel comfortable to place your hand on the shoulder of the person you're near, or if you prefer not to, simply think of somebody that you believe needs prayer today. Here we go. And so we are gathered here uniquely in all of history, we particular people in this singular time and place. Accomplish your purposes among us, O God. Tune our hearts to the voice of your Spirit. Wake us to be present to you and you alone, and let us share in the hours that we are given. For it is you, O God, who have gathered us here today from various places, and you alone who know our hearts and our needs. Among us, some of us have arrived anxious, some are lonely, some suffer in pain, some in sorrow. May we in our joys find grace to enter the sorrows of others. Among us, some are arriving rejoicing, hearts made light by good news, good health, and glad anticipation. May we in our sorrows find grace to embrace the joys of others. And let us prize these moments as we care for one another deeply, for each of us and our relationships to one another are precious and fleeting. So, Lord, we ask that you bless this time together. We thank you for this fellowship and the opportunity to gather for a purposeful moment in time. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mark. You all may be seated. A special thank you to WJR Radio, who's doing their focus show live from today's DEC meeting, and we invite you to pop in and watch after today's program. They're just on the other side of that wall. We've got students here today and always, courtesy of our generous corporate sponsors. Their morning already began with a private reception with Jerry, and I want to take a moment to recognize the students and sponsors that are with us. We've got students from Detroit Cristo Rey, thanks to an anonymous donor, Hazel Park High School, thanks to Jeff and Randy from Business Leaders for Michigan, Wayne State University, thanks to Angie and V from EY, Melvindale High School, thanks to Beth and Michelle from WTW, and the best and brightest looking group of Armenians from the AGBEU Manugian School, thanks to DTE and Jerry Norcia. How about a round of applause to welcome the students, thanking their sponsors. Two quick things on your table is our season lineup. We're loading that thing up. We've got something for everybody. Next week on Valentine's Day, we'll host Governor Whitmer, who will discuss her budget priorities. If you're a Red Wings fan, you're in luck. They are rocketing towards a playoff spot, and they'll be with us right here in this room on February 28th. In March, I think on March 12th, Barbara McQuaid, she's got a new book out. She'll be joined on stage by Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. So tons more on our website, tons more coming. So get your tickets before they sell out. Also on your table is our sponsor brochure. Please take a look at that. Make no mistake, we would not be here if it wasn't for the generosity of those corporate sponsors. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If you're interested, we'd love to talk with you about becoming a sponsor. So I mentioned 90 years. That's 90 years of speakers who tell the history of our country. And Jerry, you now join a distinguished list of 9 others who graced our stage on this day, February 6th. Here's just a couple of brief highlights. Think about the history. 1950, Brigadier General Frank Houry delivered a speech titled, "What I Learned About the Russians During the Berlin Airlift." In 1984, Coleman Young was here on our stage, and a very recognizable name, 1989, Henry Kissinger visited the DEC. So we're pleased to add you today, Jerry, as our 10th speaker on this day in DEC history. Congratulations, and thanks for being with us, Jerry. And finally, we want you to use your smartphone, and you can be involved in today's program 2 ways. One, take lots of pictures, share with your social media using #EconClub, and you can submit a question for Jerry using the QR code on your table. And those questions will make their way to our presiding officer who's about to go to work. Jeff Donofrio is the president and CEO of Business Leaders for Michigan. He is a valuable DEC board member, an amazing supporter of the DEC and me personally, and a good friend to all. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Donofrio.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here to introduce our special guest today. This is the first time I've been able to preside as a DEC board member. So my thanks to all of the staff and members of the DEC for your support. This is such an important organization, and they do such great work in the community. Let's give them a round of applause for setting up this lunch today. So today's moderator is a familiar face to us all. She is the chairwoman of the Detroit Economic Club Board, Sandy Pierce, who I believe is the first woman chairwoman of DEC in its history. She's been recognized, I think rightly so, as a powerhouse and powerful force within Detroit's business community. She recently retired from Huntington Bank after a 45-year career in the banking industry, but that is not keeping her at home. She continues to be busy serving on a number of boards, including the Penske Board, the chair of ITC's board. We know her at Business Leaders for Michigan very well because she was a longtime vice chair of our board. And she's a passionate advocate for education, for empowering teachers, for making sure students reach their full potential. And she puts, I think, her whole self into helping this state succeed and helping our young people reach their full potential at the university board that she serves on as a trustee, Michigan State, my alma mater. Go Green. All right. I am also very honored to introduce Jerry Norcia, who is CEO and chairman of DTE Energy, a role he first started in 2019. He has 30 years of experience in the energy industry and is on the front lines of shaping energy policy nationally. He chairs the American Gas Association. He's also a leader in Metro Detroit, in the business community throughout our state. Serves on the board of Henry Ford Health. He's a vice chair at Business Leaders for Michigan and chairs our Economic Development Committee. Sometimes I wonder, how people have day jobs, all these boards that they have. But Jerry's impact on our community really goes beyond the boardroom. He's been focused, I think, throughout his career, especially his time in Detroit, on breaking the cycle of poverty in our city. He's been a champion for closing equity gaps. During the pandemic, I want to tell you how Jerry helped close those equity gaps, how he tried to help make sure that Detroiters and Detroit students wouldn't be at a disadvantage because schools were let out and learning happened at home. It was Jerry's leadership who made sure that every Detroit student had a computer and free internet to continue learning every single day during the pandemic. That was Jerry. Let's give him a round of applause for that. Now, I count Jerry as a paisan, which if you know Italians, it means we have relatives that were from pretty close towns in Italy. So I also feel like, I've got a guy who is not just, out there fighting for us every day for Michigan, but his family. So please help me welcome Jerry Norcia and Sandy Pierce to the stage.
Good afternoon. So, Mark, thank you for that lovely prayer. Pray harder next year for the Lions. Okay, so I have the honor of asking Jerry some questions about not just energy, but about life in general. And I'm so thrilled to be here. I do want to start with his background, but before I ask him that question, I have to tell you, I meant to bring this book. So Jerry was honored at Yeshiva Beth Yehuda this year. And as a gift to Jerry and his family and to everyone in attendance, they created and produced a book called The Boy Who Lit Up the World. It's his entire story. And then they had kids read the entire book to the audience. It was magical, and it's a great book, and it's a great keepsake. So I have it on my desk at home, and I forgot to bring it. All right, tell us a little bit about your background, where you started in your career, and how did you come to lead DTE Energy?
Sure, great question. So just start right from the beginning. My parents are immigrants from Italy, so they immigrated to Canada in the 1950s, and we lived in Toronto. I was born, they came in the mid-50s. I was born in 1960 after a few years that they were married. My dad was a bricklayer. My mom eventually became a housekeeper in a hospital. But then when I was a little boy, we actually moved back to Italy when I was about 5.5 years old. And I got to live on my grandfather's farm. My dad's idea was, a lot of immigrant dreams are, hey, I'll make a little bit of money and then I'll go back to my country. And he went back, he wanted to be a cattle rancher, but it really wasn't very conducive to cattle ranching because we were on the side of a mountain. We were on the side of the Apennine mountain range. And so my grandfather's farm was kind of cool for me as a little kid because it had no running water, no heat, and a lot of animals. And so I got to enjoy that. I used to draw water and all that sort of thing. So my dad modernized all that. But then, long story short, we came back to Canada, settled in Windsor. I went to the University of Windsor. And graduated as an engineer, worked for the gas company in Canada called Union Gas, which is very similar to the gas company here in Detroit, almost a mirror image that was there for 16 years. But I'll tell you about my childhood growing up. I worked for my dad and my uncles in construction, and I used to always pray for rain and storms. So we didn't have to work. Unfortunately, it came really late in my career. Now that I run a big energy company, I'm getting all the storms and rain, more than I want.
Now you should stop praying for rain and storms. Okay, thank you. And where did you, so Jerry also has a beautiful family. Where did you meet your wife, Josie?
So Josie and I met in high school in Windsor, and we've been married since 1987. So going on 37 years. We've got 3 beautiful adult children. I got 4 grandkids who are just so much fun. I mean, just great joy. And I didn't tell you how I came to DT. I eventually came to DT in 2002 to start up their pipeline business, natural gas pipeline business. And we turned that into a big business. And then eventually I ran the gas utility and the electric utility. And for the last handful of years, I've been doing the job I'm doing now.
Well, we're glad you came over.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, we all know that energy literally is what powers our economy. As a leader of a Fortune 500 energy company, talk about what's happening with energy today and specifically the role that energy plays in Michigan.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, just like all infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, water systems, water treatment systems, you know, energy plays a fundamental role in making our economy work. I really do believe the fact that, you know, we can be very critical, self-critical of the infrastructure that we have in this country, but I think that's really what's propelled this country to be a powerhouse in the world is the quality of its assets. Now, a lot of those assets are old, right, and were built in the early 1900s through the middle to late 1900s, 1950s, 1960s, like our electrical grid and our power plants. So in the energy industry, specifically here in Michigan, and we're not alone in the country, we're going through this massive change and transformation in the way we produce power, the way we make electrons, you know, the electricity that flows through the wires. You know, we're predominantly coal that was built in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and we're slowly exiting coal and moving to new sources of energy. These coal plants are really old, really inefficient, and they put a lot of stuff in the air that we don't want in the air. So we're slowly transitioning out of those coal assets to renewables, wind, solar, batteries, and natural gas and nuclear we already have. So those are gonna be the main sources of energy for the next 100 years. It'll be a good portfolio mix of renewables, natural gas, battery systems, and nuclear. So we're pretty excited about that. And if that wasn't enough, we're also rebuilding the grid. About a third of our grid was built in the early 1920s through the early 60s, and it's in good need of being replaced fundamentally. And what we're doing there is we're slowly ramping up the process of rebuilding some of our oldest parts of our grid, and we're also starting to drive pilots with undergrounding as much as we possibly can. You know, we got to get the numbers right and the economics right to keep energy affordable, but we're looking to really 2 things: rebuild how we produce power, and then rebuild how we actually deliver it to our customers. All of that, over the next 5 years, we're gonna invest about $25 billion in Michigan to make that happen.
I want to talk a little bit more about natural gas, if
Sure.
I can. So, in addition to your role as the chairman and CEO of DTE, you also, and Jeff mentioned this in his introduction, you chair the American Gas Association. And thinking about that, what role does natural gas play in supporting our economy, and how does it fit with the need to produce energy with low to zero carbon emissions?
So just to give you a feel for the role that natural gas plays in this country, about 40% of the power that's produced in the country comes from natural gas now. It's surpassed nuclear and surpassed coal, as coal has retired. So it's a huge source of power to produce power. Secondly, it heats homes and businesses, and it's also used for things like to make fertilizer. So a lot of important industrial processes, steel, for example, uses a lot of natural gas to make steel. So it's really important for residential customers, really important for industrial customers, really important to produce power. So it's a very important energy source in our country today. Just to give you another fun fact, 3 times the amount of energy in this country flows in the form of natural gas compared to electricity. So it's a massive amount of energy that flows through this country in the form of natural gas. I will also say that natural gas has been a significant enabler for renewables. Everybody feels that natural gas and renewables are in competition with one another, but natural gas is there when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We need sources of power that can be on demand, that we can use it when we need it. And you certainly can't call on the sun and the wind when you need it. So natural gas provides the backstop, so does nuclear, provide the backstop for intermittent, what we call intermittent sources of energy. So we're investing in all of the above, but natural gas plays a significant role in power production and also heating people's homes. And a lot of times people say, well, geez, what should we focus on in terms of carbon emissions? Carbon is can create a global warming gas, if you will. It heats up the environment when it's trapped in the environment. And so how do you reconcile natural gas for power and for also residential heating and business uses? Well, look at natural gas. If in combination, by using it to produce power, you can reduce emissions by 80% by going from coal to natural gas, just by the fact that gas is about 50% more efficient and also 30% cleaner from a carbon perspective. And also, the largest emitting sources of carbon in our environment are two things. One is power production, which we own, and we're cleaning that up and making that much more less carbon intensive through all the investments that we're making. And the other one is transportation, vehicles. Those are the two largest sources of carbon in our economy. And those are the areas where we should really focus all of our precious resources, because they're not unlimited, to really get after those two sectors if we want to drive carbon out of the economy. And natural gas can play a significant role in that.
We'll talk a little bit more about EVs in a little bit, but let's stay with economic development and talk about what DTE and the other energy companies in Michigan do to support business and business development, which we still need so much more of in this state.
Absolutely. So just to give you a feel for DTE's investment in this state, and of course, since we're your home state utility, where we serve about half the population here in the state of Michigan, all of our investment is going back into the state of Michigan. And so just to give you a feel what that looks like, this year we'll invest about $4.5 billion in the state of Michigan to do several things. One is continue to rebuild the way we produce power, continue to make the grid more reliable, more resilient. We're replacing thousands of poles, thousands of miles of wire, transformers, you name it. Natural gas pipelines, we're replacing about 250 miles of pipe every year to modernize that system. So that's where the $4.5 billion is essentially going. And all of that's being invested in the state of Michigan. In addition to that, about half of that investment will go to Michigan suppliers. So we've got a tremendous focus on investing in the state of Michigan. And locally with diverse suppliers as well. If you start breaking up the investment, about $900 million is going to diverse suppliers. Another $900 million is going to suppliers right from the city of Detroit. So we're very focused in making sure that the capital is recycled in our economy. And that's how you create wealth. That's how you create prosperity. When you recycle your capital and your investments in your own community, you help the community prosper.
Say a little bit more about the electric grid, because you've talked about investments and protecting the grid and modernizing the grid. We've all read the stories about some of the states like California that asked everybody to basically not drive and turn off their electricity because of their issues with the grid. So how long will it take for the investments that you're making to protect our grid and support our economy?
Well, we've got a near-term objective, and then I would call a longer-term objective at DT, and let me explain the environment that we're operating in. There was a time when we get these massive storms like the ice storm that we got a year ago. They would come every 50 years, every 30 years. Now it's a fact that it seems to be happening every 1 or 2 years. We're getting these very large storms that are interrupting power supply to our customers, which nobody wants, including us, obviously. And so what do we do about that? Faced with that circumstance, what do you do about it? So we started looking at the southern utilities where they get hit by hurricanes and large tropical storms all the time. They're dealing with this every day. Like in Florida in the summertime, they have storms every day that are attacking their electric grid. And they did several things that we've adopted. One we started about 7 or 8 years ago, which was really aggressive tree trimming. So we went from investing $60 million a year in tree trimming to $200 million a year. We've got over 1,000 people that are trimming trees 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. So that was the first thing that we did 6 or 7 years ago. And so getting the trees further away from the wires, we love trees, we just don't love them under power lines. And so we, start pushing the trees back off the wires so that when the wind blows, they don't touch, they just have to touch the wire and it creates a short because trees conduct electricity. And so it knocks the power out and then you gotta go put it back on, even if it doesn't damage anything. So pushing the trees further away was huge. That makes a big impact. The second thing that we learned, and this is after last year's ice storm, was that when you have these massive storms and you have a lot of damage, it could take a long time, 3 or 4 days to repair all of that damage, which is a very long time for some people, for everyone, not just some people. And so we said, well, how can we be faster? And what we found is automation can play a significant role. So what automation does is, let's say a tree falls on a wire between two poles, takes the wires down, takes the poles down, we can isolate that outage on both sides of those poles and then reroute power to those customers. So instead of having 1,000 customers out for 4 days, now you've got 50 or 100 customers out, and the other 900 or so customers get their power back in seconds and minutes. So we've started installing this equipment on our poles and wires, and it's very simple stuff. Think about it like a valve, if you will, almost like a water valve where we can shut on both sides and then reroute around it. So that's a big investment. We're gonna make that investment over the next 5 years. That'll really fundamentally impact the duration of how long our storm customers are out for, both during storms as well as day to day. So our people are loving this equipment that we're putting out there, and it's gonna really make it a lot better for our people and much, much better for our customers. The last thing, big thing that we're doing on the grid is really replacing the oldest parts of our system, which I mentioned. We've got about 19,000 miles of circuitry, wires, and cables that serve our customers that is quite old, out of a total of 46,000 miles. So we gotta replace more than a third of our system, and that's gonna happen over the next 15 or 20 years. But as the tree trimming and automation will help bridge that period so that we can get better and better at restoring customers faster and faster. And eventually, I tell all the younger people in our company is put as much underground as you can, because then you don't have to worry about when the wind blows or we get ice or whatever. And I think that's something that the electric industry across the board is looking at really hard. And as part of the Edison Electric Institute, which is the electric side of our advocacy forum in the electric industry, I tell every CEO that'll listen is we all got to find a way to put this stuff underground, because as long as it's up in the air and exposed to the environment and these violent weather patterns that have evolved in our country, we're at risk of losing power for our customers, and that's not in anybody's interest.
To show you the integrity of the chairman and CEO of DTE, we had that really terrible storm which shut a lot of people's power off. His 3 adult children called him and said, can we be first in line? And he said, you're last in line. That's a true story.
Problem is they all piled into my house. With all the grandkids, but
Well,
that was a lot of fun.
that I can't comment on.
Okay. Josie was busy cooking there for picking up a storm.
So what you're doing at DTE around the electric grid is really impressive. Do you think we need to make the same type of investments on the gas side? Talk about the gas side.
Yeah, the gas side is, I came from the gas business. So when I first got, at that time it was called Mishcon, which is now called DT Energy Gas. So I was president of Mishcon after a couple of years that I came over to DTE. And we had 4,000 miles of cast iron. Now it's all buried, luckily, and it's all very reliable because it's underground. And but it was very old. Again, it had been installed in the early 1900s, and cast iron starts to degrade over time, and it can become a safety issue. It starts to leak. So we had all these leaks on the system, and I came from a gas company where we had eliminated all that stuff, but here we hadn't started yet. So we started a program there where gradually we went from replacing. Well, I'll tell you a funny story about it. So 4,000 miles of this stuff. I sit down with my engineers and I said, "Hey guys, how many miles are we replacing here?" They said, 4 miles. I said, "Oh, okay." So I don't have to be a rocket scientist here, but that's a 1,000-year program. I said, "Is that going to work?" "Well, of course not." I said, "Okay. So is it going to last 100 years?" "Well, no, we don't think so." I said, "Now we're getting somewhere. So now we're at 40 miles a year, right?" I said, "How about 50 years?" "Well, maybe." So we started with that program, a 50-year program. And then we went from 50 years to 25 years, and now we'll be done in about a decade. And we got about half of it out of the ground and replaced already. And we're replacing it with plastic, which will last a lot longer than cast iron. And it's modern and very safe and very reliable. So that's what we're doing on the gas business. So we're replacing about 250 miles a year.
That's great. Okay, so from agriculture to industry, a lot of our businesses in Michigan do rely on natural gas to heat and power their operations. So tell us how Michigan businesses should be thinking about natural gas now and then in the future for their business.
Sure. So again, we're blessed in this country with tremendous natural gas resources. We are essentially self-sufficient. Not essentially, we are self-sufficient from a natural gas perspective. We're actually exporting natural gas as we speak to countries like Europe so that they can have alternative sources of supply. And so it's become a very important resource not only for America, but also for some of our friends and allies across the world. And we've got so much natural gas that even at today's consumption, even if it went up, we have well over 100 years of reserves of natural gas. So in my opinion, it's going to play a very important role for many generations to come. And it is an enabler to move towards cleaner sources of energy. We're also looking at how do we make natural gas even cleaner from a carbon perspective, because that's about all that comes out of the combustion of natural gas is water and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what we breathe out after we breathe in, but it is a global warming gas. So we are finding unique ways to capture that carbon in the future from, say, exhaust stacks on a power plant, and then transporting it to reservoirs and storing it 3,000 or 4,000 feet underground in the form of a liquid. So that's very doable, and we're actually preparing for that as we continue to retire coal plants. Eventually, unless technology changes, we're going to need to build another large natural gas power plant in the state of Michigan, somewhere in Monroe County or around Monroe County, because that's where the energy highway is for us. And we'll have to capture that carbon that comes out of that stack and store it underground. And so that's really emerging technology that the federal government has provided significant incentives for companies like ours to pursue. So we're pretty excited about that.
That's fascinating. We're going to get to some EV in the question and answer period, but I'd like to, my last question to be about affordability.
Yes.
So you mentioned energy affordability, and I know it's a personal concern to you, Jerry. Can you talk about what DTE is doing to help energy affordable for the low-income customers, and what more can we do about it?
Sure. So energy affordability for those that have the least amount of resources amongst us, it's been my passion since I arrived at DTE. I feel that that's one of the reasons why I'm at DTE is to really work on this. And we've done so many creative things at DTE that I think a lot of other utilities have started to benchmark against us over the years. The one that sticks out in my mind, a good friend of mine, Hester Wheeler, who at one time was working for the NAACP here in Detroit. When I first became president of Michigan, he called me up and he said, "Jerry, why does DTE treat poor people poorly?" I said, "Hester, what are you talking about?" He says, "Have you ever been to one of your customer offices in Detroit?" I said, "No, I haven't." He says, "You should go and pay a visit." So I go to the customer office, and one of the customer offices in Detroit, it was on 8 Mile near the Lodge. Yeah. And there's people lined up around the block trying to pay their bills. And I'm thinking, well, this isn't right. Why is this happening? And then what we find out is that people are waiting for checks from, social service agencies to try and pay their utility bill because they've either been shut off for non-payment or they're on some sort of payment plan that they have to restore their service with before they get shut off. I thought, well, this is horrible. These people lined up in the cold or heat, whatever, for hours. And as we started to study the problem, we found out that not only are they lined up at our offices, they're also lined up at the DHHS offices trying to get energy assistance. So they're spending a lot of time, and some of these people are working. Okay, like they're security guards, they're in jobs that don't pay a lot of money, and they're spending half their time trying to get energy assistance and social assistance for basic needs like energy. And so what we did is we spent a lot of time with the Michigan Public Service Commission and the state government to come up with a program where not asking for more money and more energy assistance, but to take that money and apply it to the bill every month to get the bill down to an affordable level. So what did that do? That brought dignity to the process. These people are not lined up in our offices. They're not lined up at the DHS offices for hours on end, trying to just garner a basic need, funding for a basic need. And so that's been a great success story and something that we remain passionate about, and we're trying to evolve and make it better each and every day. But that's just one story of things that we're doing. So every year we bring in, DT is known in the industry to go out and get the most amount of federal assistance that we could possibly get in Washington. We bring in about $160 million a year for our low-income customers so that they can afford their bills.
That's really great. Thank you. Let's, if we can, give Jerry a round of applause, and then we're going to bring Jeff Donofrio. Jeff Donofrio will take over and ask your questions for you. Thanks, Jeff.
We've got a lot of questions from the audience, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. Jerry, maybe one from the students here to start with. What's been your biggest surprise since you became chairman and CEO?
Wow, there's been so many of them. COVID was the biggest one. I was 5 months into the job, and COVID rolled in. And I still remember when my first grandson was born on March 12th, 2020, we shut down the DT headquarters because we had 4 cases in the headquarters. So everybody goes home. The whole company, all the office workers go home, which is about half of our company in terms of employees. And I remember my wife looking at me and saying, "How are you going to run this big company from home?" I said, "I have no idea." But I said, "We're going to figure it out," and we did. So that was, with adversity comes innovation and new ways of doing things. So I think COVID taught us a lot. It created a lot of pain and suffering in our communities, but it also created some really cool things that I think have really changed the way we do work in our country and in the world.
Yeah, you talk about disruptions, technology, innovation. There's questions about what impact AI will have on many different industries. How do you see that playing out in the energy industry?
Well, it's interesting. It's a hot topic, right, today. And, AI will help, facilitate and create also further innovation where people can be, working on things that are a much, much higher level from a brain power perspective, if you will, versus doing mundane tasks that perhaps we can automate. And that's what we've started to do inside our company. I mean, we call it artificial intelligence, but a lot of it is, can we use artificial intelligence to help us analyze, ascertain certain patterns that perhaps would be very laborious from a human perspective, and allow humans to really look at the information and still make judgment calls that computers and other things can't do at this point in time.
Speaking of disruptions, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years about the impact of electric vehicles, how that will change the business of delivering power, when power will be demanded. There's been a lot of talk too about either the acceleration or maybe the being a little bit slow for implementation on uptake of customer purchase of EV. How do you view it at this point? How will the grid be affected? And what's the supply needs that you see in the next number of years?
Great question. So I sort of create an analogy here between electric vehicles and the advent of air conditioners, for example. That was a huge demand on the grid back in the 60s and 70s. And it took a long time for that adoption to happen. Like, it went really, really slow. And now it's like, no one can live without air conditioning, right? And in the summers here in Michigan. So I view that EVs it's gonna take time for the technology to be adopted, and there's a lot of growing pains, right, that we're all learning about. Like, for example, I think there's plenty of charging stations out there now, especially in the large cities. Now we gotta make sure they work, right? And so we need to develop good processes and systems, because so many different entities own these chargers that it's hard to maintain them and make sure that they're well functioning all the time. And so I think that's challenge number one. In terms of the grid, we're investing heavily. We went, over the last 5 years, we put about $5 billion into the grid. Over the next 5 years, we'll put $9 billion into the grid, and it's really for two reasons. One is to be able to deal with the weather that keeps coming our way and make the grid more reliable, and then two, to build the capacity in the event as EVs start to come onto the system. Like, we're bringing on about 1,000 EVs onto our system right now every month, and that a few years ago that was 200 or 300 a month, so it's starting to ramp. There's so many different projections as to how fast it'll happen, and we're playing out all those scenarios, low scenarios, medium scenarios, and high scenarios to make sure that we can handle it all. From a supply perspective, we're going to have to build more energy resources in the form of renewables as well as gas. And I'm hopeful that nuclear will have a bit of a renaissance as they experiment with small modular nuclear reactors. There's a lot of experimentation going on right now with those, and we'll see what that brings in the future as well as a supply source.
We've talked just offline because of my curiosity around nuclear and the cost to build a plant today. I mean, what's the ballpark cost for a new nuclear plant in the country?
It's extraordinary, and that's the challenge with large nuclear plants. So to give you an example, in St. Clair County, we built a state-of-the-art natural gas plant for $1 billion, which I know is a lot of money. We built it on time and on schedule, and it puts out 1,200 megawatts of energy. Now, that might not mean anything to you, but I'll give you a comparison. To build the same size nuclear plant, so $1 billion, 30 employees, 35 employees to run it. Same size nuclear plant would be $15 billion. So 1 billion versus 15 billion, plus 500 to 700 people to run it. So it's a very expensive proposition.
There's some questions around the grid itself and the threat of disruption, either from a cybersecurity event, a failure that might happen in the system. How are you preparing for that or guarding against any threats that could be domestic or foreign?
Great question. So if you were to come into our cyber control center at DTE, it's here in Detroit, there's a screen that shows all the attacks on DTE's grid alone. So imagine another 100 companies like us across the United States, but just at DTE alone, there's thousands of attacks every day, and they all come from China. Other hostile countries like Russia that are constantly, they call it shaking locks. They're trying to see if anything's unlocked. So they're testing, probing. And so we got a control center that's constantly vigilant in terms of ensuring that our assets are secure. And we're not alone. So the whole industry has a strong cooperative with the federal government, with departments that you could imagine that are in charge of the security of our country. We're in constant communication. They can actually see the traffic on our system, the entire grid in America. And if they know something that we don't know, there's immediate contact and conversation in order to create barriers to entry. So we call it a defense in depth strategy. So many layers of defense. And also you have to worry about inside actors. So we have to have a very strong program to make sure that we're not bringing people on the inside that could eventually attack the system from the inside. So a lot that goes on there each day, every minute of the day, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. It's something you have to be constantly vigilant about in our industry.
I'm glad you're looking at that and being constantly vigilant, because it certainly is something important to our national security too.
It is.
Let's turn to Michigan for a second and ask, you sit obviously on the Business Leaders for Michigan board, you're vice chair. How do we make sure that Michigan is the most competitive for job growth? How do we make sure that we're putting our best foot forward?
Well, I think the first thing we always have to focus on is, do we have a great workforce that can attract businesses to come to our state? And it's my thesis that we've got great educational institutions that turn out great potential future workers in this state for new businesses that want to come to this state. But there's more that we need to do there. I mean, our education system does need to be upgraded and invested in so that we can turn out more qualified workers and make that a more attractive feature for Michigan. Our education system as institutions that we have in Michigan are unparalleled, especially at the higher education levels. So we just need to make sure that we're also creating the appropriate feeder education institutions to make that happen. That's one. And then number two, I think we have to be competitive with things like energy pricing and infrastructure to make sure that when people show up here, we can put them, give their business locations, put them in a place where there's great roads, great energy infrastructure, water systems, water treatment systems. Those are really important to large industries that want to move into our state. So it's a joint effort, and Jeff does a great job along with the MEDC to try and bring people together and bring them to Michigan. And we've had some great successes in the recent past, but I think we have to do more and more of that to bring more industry, more work to the state of Michigan.
Speaking of education, so a question from one of our students in the crowd. When you were in high school and college, what career pathway did you think you were going down, and how did that evolve?
It evolved. I originally wanted to be a lawyer, and I was really good in math and physics and chemistry. And my teacher at the time, it would have been in 12th grade in Canada, said, "Geez, you know you want to be a lawyer, but you're really good at math and sciences. Like, why don't you think about being an engineer?" So I did a little bit of research and kind of really liked the idea of being an engineer. I always liked to build things. My whole family was involved in construction. We were always building things, so I felt like that would be a natural extension for me to be an engineer where I'd actually continue to build things, if you will. So that's why I ended up in engineering.
All right. Well, we're glad you found your way to DTE eventually. And great teachers and mentors are important, right, Sandy Pierce? That's right. Okay, we're going to go to the lightning round.
Oh, yeah.
So
All right.
quick questions, quick answers. Something on your bucket list?
I like to ride motorcycles, so I'd love to ride a motorcycle through Europe.
All right. What type of motorcycle?
In Italy, I got a Moto Guzzi. It's in my grandfather's house there that I've restored.
Nice.
Yeah.
Your best sport growing up?
Let's say it was soccer.
Okay, and today?
Golf. If you could call it good. Yeah.
It's not as tough on the knees.
Best sport I can play at this point. Yeah.
What's the last book you read?
I read Eisenhower by Stephen Ambrose. Great book. Great story about him. His life story.
Favorite vacation spot?
Italy.
Favorite town in Italy?
Yeah, near Casino. That's where my family's from, halfway between Rome and Naples.
All right. Describe Detroit in one word.
Tough.
Okay. Well done on the one word. Usually people, they put 5 or 10 in there. You know. What was your first car?
It was a 1980 Camaro that I bought with cash, working for my dad and my uncles. I walked into the dealership. I was 17 years old. I've been working for a lot of years, right, to save up this money. I still remember how much it cost, about $8,000 back then. And I walked in and paid for it, and I thought I was pretty proud of myself.
What was the color?
Midnight blue.
Midnight blue.
T-bars. Eventually put the mags on it, did all that stuff back in the 80s.
All right, last question. The best dish you cook?
Oh, wow. I only, in terms of a large meal, I cook once a year at Christmas Eve, and I cook cioppino, which is an Italian stew. And for me, it was an efficiency play because, if you know the Italian culture, you're supposed to cook 7 fish, right, on Christmas Eve. Well, that's too much work, so I put them all 7 of them in one pot and made a stew. Yeah.
Smart, it's a utility.
It's a utility mindset, yeah. Go to the...
There you go. All right, well, with that, we want to thank Jerry Norcia for his wonderful speech today and the question and answer. I'm going to bring
Thank you.
Steve back up to close us out.
Yeah.
Jerry, thank you so much for being with us. You're
pleasure.
welcome back here anytime. Thanks for
Pleasure.
your generous support of the Detroit Economic Club as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff and Sandy, your important roles, you played them so well. Thank you. And Sandy, you're the best board chair. I got the best board chair ever, people, okay? It's Sandy Pierce. Thank you. So one final round of applause for Jerry, Sandy, and Jeff.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see the final 30 minutes of the WJR Focus Show. Thank you, Steve Finiteri, for our partnership. It's right on the other side of that wall. They'd love to have you pop in. We've got a couple of our board members here jumping on the air as well, Jeff and Steve Davis, so you can listen to that. Tell your friends and colleagues to join the Detroit Economic Club. We're a bunch of really cool people. So, on time, every time, this meeting of the Detroit Economic Club is now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.